Now, in order to be able to figure out how we manage load, we have to know when our athletes actually fatigued. So let's talk a little bit about fatigue to start this out. So fatigue is when the body has a decreased both physiologic, so physical, and psychological functioning, so that they have encountered this as a result of an increased physical or mental load, right? So we know that the load was high and fatigue has set in. But why it's important to know when your athlete is fatigued is that it plays a role in many aspects of sport, including increased injury risk, increased illness, concussion, burnout, right? So if you're not tracking your athlete's load and you're not aware if your athlete is fatigued, then you run the risk of having these issues occur without knowing it, without being able to prepare. So regarding performance, when you're fatigued, we may see reaction time go down, power output go down, technical skill and decision making be affected by fatigue. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. We get into the middle of a basketball season that's got 20, 30 games. Well, if you're not aware that your players are fatiguing, if you haven't been tracking the load, then you don't know when it's better to give them a little bit more recovery, maybe to not do a tournament at a specific time, or time the level of load to be down when you're approaching a big tournament. Now, fatigue can be measured in a variety of factors as well. So the internal ways in which we can measure fatigue, a lot of times is just athlete reporting, so an athlete distress survey. Also, heart rate recovery is a nice way to be able to look at fatigue if you have the tools to do that. And then external is just performance metrics. So having sprint times or jumps, high jumps, to look at how their performance is tracking over time is a great, easy way to do it. There is also something called a carbon dioxide tolerance test, and just kind of like a breath holding test can be a proxy or an estimate of fatigue. So what we're getting at is there may be some particular measures or physical work that you can test the body on to see, hey, in the preseason, you could jump this high. Now, during the season, your high jump is here. That might be evidence of fatigue. So in talking about heart rate recovery, basically what that means is that the body has a amount of time that once the workout stops, after exercise, the body is able to return the heart rate back to normal. And the amount of time that that takes is called your heart rate recovery time. Well, the thought is that if you are slower at recovering your heart rate back to your baseline, that may be indication of fatigue. And if you have some of the smartwatches, they do show you this. And so that may be something to keep an eye on to know, okay, my heart rate recovery over 2 minutes is kind of the typical, and seeing what it gets down to. And if it is not able to get as low as what you normally could get to in that 2-minute time frame, may be something to keep an eye on. So that's something that you could certainly track. I think runners like to track this quite a bit. And then just self-reported monitoring. You know, I'm not saying that it needs to be this dramatic, full-on team meeting, but I do think it makes sense to every couple of weeks or every week just kind of check in with your team and measure their fatigue emotionally, cognitively, their physical fatigue. There's lots of different surveys that can do this. And then I think performance metrics is a great idea. I think if you said, hey, every 2 weeks we're going to do vertical jump testing or a sprint test or a grip strength, just to track it over time to say, hey, okay, the majority of my team's vertical jump testing is a little bit lower than their baseline. I think we're experiencing some fatigue. We're going to back off the intensity at practice. I think those are easy things to do for a coach or athletic trainer. So here are some of the athletes' self-reported monitoring scales. They're all within the literature and can be reviewed. I tend to like the multi-component training distress scale. It just seemed like the questions are more pertinent and easily readable for young athletes. Some of these scales will be like 80 questions. So this one's a pretty short one. And so I'll give you some examples of what you might ask. And maybe you just kind of use a tailored version of it for your athletes or for your child. So this one's 22 questions, and here are some sample questions. In the past week, have you felt fatigued and exhausted during or after your training? Very simple question. In the past week, have you felt a lack of motivation or enthusiasm for your training? And in the past week, have you felt like your training is not improving your performance or achieving your goals? Well, this is a perfect way to just check in with the athlete, especially if you've done this repetitively throughout the season. That's one way to just measure how the athlete's feeling and kind of get the pulse of your team or get the pulse of your child.